Believe it or not, we're pretty much through all of the high-profile fighting releases for this year, and it was a pretty good year.
Gonna shove my fist up your...
It could use a polish.
I'm Falcon, and today on GameRank's 2017's Best Fighting Games. Number 15 is Pokken Tournament, an attempt at taking the Tekken-style gameplay and infusing it into the Pokemon franchise. It's not a brand new game by any means, but if you liked the Wii U version, just wish there were a few more characters, a few new modes, and although they didn't really spruce up the graphics enough for me to really care about it, I don't know that I really care that I don't care about the graphics improvements, if there are even any. This is one of those games that is great for new players, it's great for players who like Pokemon and Tekken, it gives you enough depth to keep coming back, and, well, you can play it with your kid brother who has never played Tekken before. I mean, they have to learn it a little bit, but not as much as if you put Tekken in. Number 14 is Chaos Code New Sign of Catastrophe, a game that actually isn't that new at all, but is the absolute definitive version of a game that really got overlooked back in 2013 when it came out on PlayStation 3. Now, 2D fighting games really don't get the kind of attention that they deserve, both during the development phase and during the release phase, at least in the last, 10 years. But you can tell this one was crafted with love. There's so much really well done animation in it, including more frames of animation in this version, as well as a totally rebalanced fighting system that pretty much makes this the version of the game you want to own. This is one that you may not have played when it came out originally, and it's very worth it. Number 13 is Nidhogg 2, which is, well, let's just say a strange game. That's not to be insulting, I mean strange as a compliment. I mean, you can kind of think of this game as a platformer, but you really are going to want to play it competitively. In which case, it's pretty much one of the more interesting fighting games, innovative, fun, and a game that encourages you to be inventive with its different weapons and various odd situations that you end up in. And as somebody who played the original Nidhogg, I think that this one is a lot better than the first, but none of these improvements reinvent the wheel. It's still very much the game you love, with tighter controls and more options. Number 12 is Brawlout, which is, guess what? Difficult to describe without saying the game that it's inspired from, but I'll bet you can guess from seeing the gameplay. Brawlout calls itself a party fighting game, and if you ask me, it does very much live up to its spiritual successor. And the major plus side, you're never going to see Super Smash Bros. On a console or platform that isn't Nintendo owned. This gives you that experience on any platform you want to play it on, including the PC. And it is every bit as good as you want it to be. This is a game you organize weekends around. No joke. Number 11, another brawler, another party fighter, another platform fighter, depending on what you want to call them. Brawlhalla is the 2D entry to the brawler genre. And you know what? It's every bit as fun as Brawlout, but gives you a slightly different experience because you can have up to 8 people playing at once. It's 2D, so there's a few things that feel a little more limited, a few things that feel a little bit better expanded upon. Sometimes a view is significantly better on the 2D game, but it doesn't always feel as chaotic despite having more people on screen. Still, you can't go wrong with this kind of game done right, and Brawlhalla is exactly that. Although to be fair, this one is not out on as many platforms. I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up out on more though. Number 10 is Gundam Versus, which is one of those games where in the 1990s you probably said to yourself, this would be really cool if they could do it. At least if you were playing fighting games back then. Oddly enough, not a lot of these types of things have happened. A totally 3D fighting game that focused on maintaining the hectic, chaotic gameplay style of an arcade brawler, but manages to increase the scope to give you a big, modern feeling behemoth of a game. This is that game. This does everything you want it to do, and being its Gundam, it gets pretty wild. But let's be frank, if there is anything that lends itself to a hectic, fast-paced 3D fighting environment, it's Gundam with its big robots and its insane everything. Number 9 is Guilty Gear Xrd Rev 2, which just graphically alone, this is one of the coolest games there is. I mean, it's not the first version of this game. It is a definitive version of it, so to speak, but really there hasn't been a game that looks better than this, that's trying to do the same things this game is trying to do. There's new characters, the story mode is completely redone, it basically plays like a new game. Oftentimes sequels to fighting games just end up like this, upgrade to a phenomenal fighting game. I'm talking to you, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo Championship Edition. And yes, I know I amalgamated several of the titles to say that. Number 8 is Naruto Storm 4, the Road to Boruto expansion, which for all intents and purposes is indeed a DLC of the original game. However, it does give you a lot of great things, particularly graphics upgrades. It runs much smoother. These are Naruto fights in their most cinematic form. It doesn't quite parallel the Guilty Gear graphics as far as anime style 3D fighting graphics, but it does look really, really good. It is a gorgeous game and it is fun as hell to play. If there's one minor gripe, it's $20 and this is about a 5-hour expansion to the game. Number 7 is Ultra Street Fighter 2, and yes, I know I made a joke about their naming scheme. And yes, I know we're still playing Street Fighter 2 this many years later, but there's really no denying Street Fighter 2. This brings together all the sort of additions and improvements over the many years of Street Fighter 2's existence, and gives you the option of using the original graphics versus some very slick, really nice HD remake graphics. Now, there are issues with this game. There are a few characters that are a little bit off visually. And if you've bought a lot of versions of Street Fighter 2, unless you're some kind of completionist, I can't imagine buying this version. But if you're somebody like myself who has kind of played the very, very mainline numbered updates to the game, and you kind of just want an excuse to play Street Fighter 2, which is pretty much the definitive version of the game, everything sprang forth from it, is probably the way to do it. And I've seen a lot of complaints for the game about various in-game things, but if you ask me, the main detriment to this game is just the Nintendo Switch joypad. Playing this thing with the Pro Controller completely changes the experience, in my opinion makes it very positive. Number 6 is WWE 2K18, and I gotta say it has one of these bad career sports modes in it that for whatever reason has side quests, you know, in a fighting game for WWE. Doesn't matter. Game is actually a hell of a lot of fun. If you use create a match, set everything up, and go to town, that's so much more interesting. Let's not kid ourselves here, this game exists for local multiplayer, and it exceeds expectations as far as that goes. I really enjoy it. Number 5, Absolver is a really interesting online fighting game that gives you kind of a massively multiplayer feel without actually doing it, but ends up putting you in a lot of matches that contain really fluid movement and plays somewhere between a cross of a traditional fighting game and Dark Souls, oddly enough. And I'm not the first person to say that, it's just that is easily the most relevant way of describing the game. It's a game that's generally been well received, but I think it has gotten some oddly harsh criticism at times, and I just think the way that they allow you to sort of experiment until you find a move set that you really enjoy makes this a game that's pretty different from other games in the genre that, let's be frank, is also beautiful in its own weird way. Number 4 is Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, which takes everything down a notch as far as how much is going on, but ratchets up exactly how it happens, if that makes any sense. They've added the whole Infinity Stone concept to match in with, obviously, the storyline it's talking about in its title. It simplifies the tag team system, bringing it down to 2 characters from the 3 it had before, but it does it without messing up any of the depth. You're allowed to experiment way more in this game, and I think that it is much stronger from it. Although I will say there are a couple of things lacking. The roster, for instance, but honestly, who knows what's going on with that? It seems like a lot of it's tied up in various companies owning the rights to various things. So I'll give them a pass on this entry, but they better get this shit straightened out for the next one. That being said, this is probably the best one of these in quite a while. Number 3 is Injustice 2, and I have to say this is probably one of the biggest fighting games of all time. Just the sheer volume of stuff that you can do, just in single player, solo mode, story, narrative, whatever you want to call it. There's more here than, frankly, any other game this year. Now, that doesn't make it the best fighting game of the year, but it certainly makes it very worth the purchase, because it is easily among one of the best fighting games of all time. It does so much to improve from the first. They streamlined a few things, made the characters a little bit faster, but didn't do anything too drastic, just enough to make it seem more deep. Just seems smoother, nicer, and frankly, the story is just miles above the first. It's much more interesting the whole way through. If you like the first of these, I can't imagine you liking this one less. And I would guess that you'd end up liking this more, because the stuff that worked in the first one is here, and there's much more of it, while the stuff that didn't isn't. It's everything you want from a sequel and more. Number 2 is ARMS on the Nintendo Switch. This was one of those games that just came out of nowhere. When Nintendo brings in new IP, you better believe they have a good reason to. When I first saw this, I was like, nah. Is it Punch-Out or is it Wii Sports? It is much more than either of those two things. In a way, lessons from those were learned and incorporated, but this is very much its own game. It's such a weird game, and yet at the same time it's very intuitive. I didn't take very long getting acclimated to this one. It's kind of the Mario Kart of fighting games, or more recently, the Splatoon of fighting games. And finally, number 1 is Tekken 7, which, by the way, pretty much is to Tekken what I wanted Street Fighter V to be for Street Fighter. That's not to say the gameplay wasn't there for Street Fighter V, but the content sure wasn't. Oh my friends, that is very different for Tekken 7. Tekken 7 is everything you expect from a Tekken game and more. This is a game that has been modernized, but not so much it's an unrecognizable title. It's Tekken, it plays like Tekken, you feel like you're playing Tekken. However, it looks so much better, and for people who aren't necessarily sure what to do starting up, this is a little bit more friendly regarding AI progression, but let's be frank here, as I've said with a couple of other games on this list, this is a game to play with friends on a couch, to organize local tournaments, order pizzas, and feel like shit on Monday because you just spent too many nights in a row playing Tekken. Hell of a game. What was your favorite fighting game this year? Leave us a comment. If you enjoyed this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now would be a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week, and the best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. As always, thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter @FalconTheHero, and we'll see you next time right here on Game Ranks.